All right. Let's do it. Let's do it. All right. So as you can see from the course content here in Canvas, we're going to start with the basics this week. We're going to start with a very simple exploration and understanding of what it's like to make and create objects inside of our 3D world. We're going to be using a program in here called Modo, and all the video content focuses on this application. So these are not like these are not videos of another application that you have to like transform and make work in your brain. All the stuff that I'll be giving you guys is directed towards the app and the ideas that we're going to be talking about in class. So let's get started. The first thing that, if you're following along, that I would like you to do is to download this 3D Access Overview file. It's a zipped archive, and inside that file you're going to find some really fun things. It's just a single file. All right. Actually, I was working on something during my lunch break today. Let me just get rid of all this stuff. And we can jump in and start looking at what it's like to work inside of Modo. So we're going to be working in an application called Modo. And if you look down in your dock, and I'm on my laptop here, so my dock, the icons on my dock are a little bit different from the icons that you're going to find in your dock. But go ahead and find this one, this dock right there. And, many apologies. Looks like there's a problem with the video on some people's. Some people are getting it to work, others are not. I will troubleshoot and fix that problem as we go forward. Did the zipped archive come through though? Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Great. Great. So this is the icon that you're looking for in the dock itself. We're working on Modo 10.2. The crew down at the Foundry do an excellent job of constantly updating their application with new tools, bug fixes, stability, and performance tweaks. It's very actively developed. Get used to seeing those colors, that little green and black, and those are the icon colors for all the files that you're going to be producing from Modo itself. If you click on that big circle at the bottom, you're going to launch the application. Give it a second or two to load, and what you're going to find is an application that looks not too dissimilar from this, and many apologies. Let me turn my screen to reflect what your screen is going to look like. There we go. All right, so you're going to find a screen that looks not too dissimilar to this. Welcome to Modo. Okay, Modo is a pretty fantastic app. It's classified as a DCC app, so a direct content creation app. And it does everything from making models and textures to animation, dynamic simulations, and of course renders as well. It's a full suite. It's not just one thing, it's many things, okay? It's a full suite of tools that allows us to make all the art from a video game or an animation or even as long as a feature film. It's a pretty fantastic application. I love Modo. I'm a long-time Maya user. I've been working inside of Maya since, I think, version 3 or version 4. They stopped counting a while ago, and now they just do yearly updates to Maya. But point being, this is not the only app in our world. You're going to find that there are a lot of other DCC apps out there, Maya being one, 3D Studio Max being another, Cinema 4D is another great one that a lot of folks use. Personally, I think Modo is the best one to use to learn this process. It's really easy to understand. It's an incredibly powerful application with very strong tools. It's customizable, and it makes it's real difficult to get confused as to specifically what the computer's doing. Okay? Other applications, and I'm looking at you, Maya, okay? Man, you have to have a PhD in computer science just to run the damn thing, right? It's not exactly made for artists. Modo is, okay? And it's great. You're going to find that Modo is used all over the place inside of our industry, from Valve to Industrial Light and Magic, and down there at DreamWorks as well. Modo is everywhere, and it's a pretty fantastic app, okay? I love it. I love it. I know. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there like a student version?
Yeah. We'll talk about that a little bit later. And the question was, is there a student version that you can get? Yes, absolutely. If you go onto the Foundry's website, you can get an academic license. I think it's $150 a year. And then it's a full unrestricted version of the app, just that it just turns off after a year. Okay? It's pretty great. You can also download a 30-day trial. And when I'm not live streaming, I'll tell you more about that 30-day trial here in a minute, because there is a lovely little workaround that someone discovered. But yeah, go check it out. It's pretty good. We'll talk about the student version towards the end of class again today. Moto is really broken down into a couple major areas. And I want to give you just a very simple interface tour. We're not going to go through everything, but it's important to understand the lay of the land and the role of each one of these major parts of our interface. The Moto interface is very different from interfaces that you see in other apps like Photoshop or Illustrator. This is a true 3D environment, and navigating and participating inside this workflow can be a challenge from time to time. Sue, can you do me a huge favor? Right above you, I think it's the silver chain. Can you close the blinds back there? I think it's the silver chain. I get the sense that it's kind of washing out my screen a little bit. That's better. Okay, great. Thank you. We have this great interface, but it's incredibly dark, okay? So I like to get it as dark in here as we possibly can. So let's go through some of the major parts of the Moto interface, get everyone up and running, at the very least comfortable with how all of this is laid out, okay? So up here at the very top, and I got to apologize because I accidentally closed it. Over here at the very top of the screen, we have all these tabs. Now, if you don't see these tabs, as mine was just a second ago, this area is collapsible. So if you click on the black line, you can expand and contract the switcher bar. Okay, and this allows us to change and kind of reorganize our interface to bring certain tools and workflows to the surface. As I mentioned a minute ago, Moto is a full app, right? It's a full suite of tools. It's not just modeling and texturing tools. It's got animation tools and dynamic tools and rendering tools. It's pretty great. So each one of these tabs and interfaces brings to the surface a different workflow and a different series of tubes. Series of tubes? That's series of tools. Excuse me. Series of tubes, that's the internet, according to George W. Bush. If you zoom in and take a look at them, they're pretty neat. There's a whole bunch of stuff in here. For the most part, we're going to be hanging out in the modeling tab. I'd say overwhelmingly, we're going to be in the modeling tab. And then again, we're going to be down over here inside of the render tab. So the modeling tab is where we're going to build and edit our models. And then the render tab, way down over here, is where we're going to ask the computer to make some pictures for us. This is the environment in which we're going to set up the parameters for the render engine to draw our picture. Okay? So the modeling tab and the render tab, that's where we're going to hang out for probably, the exclusivity of this course. Let's return to the modeling tab real fast and start looking at some of the major components of this work environment that will help us create our models. Now, in the modeling tab, the interface is really broken up into three kind of zones. This first zone is this guy, way over here. And these are all of our modeling tools. You're going to find pretty quickly that the developers down at the Foundry have created this really great stackable interface that has a whole series of vertical tabs, okay? We don't do horizontal tabs too often. We do vertical tabs. So our toolbar is really a whole collection of tools. Each one of these tabs brings to the surface, a category of tools. So all the duplication tools are in one part. The vertex editing tools are in another. The basic tool tab here at the top are the all-stars, if you will. These are the tools that you're probably going to be using the most. They include the basic shape creation tools and then some editing tools that you're going to be using quite often. So the basic tool tab is where we're going to be spending the lion's share of our energy inside of our toolbar environment. You'll see me talk about this again here in a minute, but I just want to fire off a tool to showcase the second part of the toolbar, and that's this line here. See this big little gray line? It divides this part of our interface into two areas. We have the tools up here, and then when we fire off a tool, you can see that the bottom is going to populate with some tool options. Now, don't worry about how I did that, but I just wanted you to see that when a tool is on and active, that bottom part of our interface is going to become important as well. Because this is where we're going to be able to go in and manipulate a series of channels that will influence the behavior of the tool we just fired off. Okay, so this is always, the left-hand part of the scene is always going to be tools, okay? We're going to skip the center part for the time being because we're going to come back and spend a tremendous amount of time on this in a minute. But very quickly, I wanted just to draw your attention to the right-hand part of our screen. This is a utility area. The right-hand part of our screen is broken up into two areas. The first This top part is home to a whole series of tabs, and when you get more comfortable working inside of Modo, those other tabs are going to play a role in our modeling process. But for the majority of our time in this class, the Items tab is where we're going to be spending some energy. Okay? The item list, as it's called, shows us a hierarchical list of all the objects and items that are currently residing inside of our scene. You can see just by the contents that are currently in that item list that there are 3 things that come with every scene: a mesh item, which is that little blue cube, a camera, and a light. Okay? As your models continue to grow in complexity, this list is going to turn into something quite humongous. I love working inside of the item list. It's an easy way. It's kind of like your Photoshop layers palette, if you will. Shoot, they even stole the visibility icon from Photoshop. Okay, it looks almost identical, and in every sense, it works similarly to how a layer would work over in Photoshop, where you can activate and deactivate large connections or large collections of polygons or any other things inside of our item list. Shoot, let me just show you an example of this. Right. I showed you this, I think, last time. There's a project that I'm just working on for myself, my observatory, and look at my item list. Look at all the different things that are chilling inside of my scene. There's a bunch of stuff. There's mesh items and fusion items and lights and cameras. It's a way for us to just very quickly visualize everything that's in play inside of our scene. And naturally, this visibility icon is going to become a major player in this workflow. For example, if I turn this row on, you can see that all the geometry associated with that row turns on, so on and so forth. Here's the top. I can select big groups here and start to see and understand how all this is going to work. Okay? All right. There we go. Pretty cool. So the item list is a great way for us to very quickly see a list of all the different objects and elements that are currently inside of our scene. Okay, let's return back to our simple scene and then travel south down to the bottom. Before I head south, though, I'm going to grab my camera just by left-clicking on the item in the list, because once we have an item selected, this bottom part of our interface becomes a little bit more important. The bottom part of this zone on the right-hand side of the screen is really reserved for a whole series of properties of the selected item. So I've selected my camera, and now I'm seeing all the properties, the physical channels that are making this object work, okay? And naturally, we're going to be exploring this in grand detail as we get more comfortable working inside of Modo, but this is the purpose of this part of the interface. So we have items, and then we have properties of that item. And there are so many properties associated with these items that, once again, the guys and gals down at the Foundry have recycled their convention and have given us a whole series of vertical tabs to filter and categorize the properties that we can adjust and can control inside of our interface. All right, so left-hand side of the screen, tools. Right-hand side of the screen, items and properties, okay? Kind of a utility area for the most part, which brings us to the area that we're going to be spending almost all of our time, and that is the viewport, okay? This viewport is a window into our three-dimensional scene. It's where we're going to be spending all of our time. So let's get comfortable working inside of this environment. If you haven't already, go back to Canvas and download that 3D Access overview file that I put inside the Week 2 module. I have it downloaded on my machine already. Let me just load it up here real fast. And once you unzip it, there it is right there. Okay, once you unzip it, just double click on the file and it will open that file up inside of Modo. Okay, now we have something to play with. Now we have something to work with and something that we can use to understand how this viewport is going to be used and start to translate how our brain needs to think in order for us to build and edit this wonderful geometry. Now, if you've opened your project and you get something like this, where the model is really small inside the frame. Yeah, question, Frank?
How do I download that? This right here?
The one right above it, the cloud. Yep.
Click on it,
There it goes.
and then
And then
does this.
click on that.
Okay.
Yep. You just need a single left click too. Here on the Mac, we don't do double clicks. Everything's just a single click. Okie dokie. So here's a great little trick, keyboard shortcut of the day. If you open up your project file like we just have, and your scene is really small inside of the viewport, hit the A key. A for autofit. And that's going to maximize the content of your scene inside the viewport. It's a great way just to quickly zoom in and get up close and personal with the model and the geometry in your scene. All right. So welcome to working in 3D. One of the biggest challenges that I have in front of me is to translate your brain from working in 2D to working in 3D, in 3 dimensions. Up until now, everything that you've created has been a 2-dimensional image. Every picture you've taken, drawing that you've created, it's all been in 2D. Well, now we're going to be building what could be easily described as a sculpture in 3D. So let's take some time for a second here and really understand what in the world is 3D, right? What are we talking about, right? How is a 2D image different from that of a 3D image or a 3D model? How is it different? Maybe we should start with what's the same. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, wait, I'm sorry. How are they the same or are they different?
How are they different?
One offers more depth, I guess you could say.
Absolutely, and that's really what. Yeah, go ahead.
I mean, the comparison I was going to use is like when you say draw a ball or circle with values and shadings, you can make it look 3-dimensional on a piece of paper, but it's still 2D.
It's just an illusion, right? Yeah.
Here you're actually in a space, like inside of a space.
Yeah, I like that. I like that. Absolutely. I think that's really great. What we're trying to create here and how it's fundamentally different is that we are creating objects in depth, right? So let's define that for a second here, okay? We're going to go into the way back machine, and for some of you, it's going to be really way back like me, others not too long ago, to 10th grade geometry, right? 10th grade geometry. You were asked to plot points on a 2D Cartesian grid that looked something like this. Actually, it looked more like this, right? You guys remember this thing? The rule? Yeah, everyone's like, yeah, I remember this thing. This is the graph that you love to hate, right? Because they always said, find this point or plot this line, and you knew what the answer was, but then they're like, but show your work, and you're like, yeah, right, yeah. It's like I know the answer, but I just don't know how. I don't know how my brain got there. So this is a 2D Cartesian grid. And if you did well or even mediocre in your 10th grade geometry class, you became a ninja at plotting points along this 2D grid, right? So if your instructor said, hey, okay, so here's a dot, okay? Find the location of said dot. What is the coordinate, the location of that dot? How would you do it? Huh? 2, 3, and you're absolutely right. How'd you get there? Show your work.
Well, on the x-axis, you go over to the right 2, and you go up on the y-axis 3 times.
Bingo, there it is. So you just count the ruler markers, right? You go over 2, 1, 2. So its x location is 2. And then you do the same thing going vertically, right? 1, 2, 3. Boom. And now we have its y location. We've defined pretty quickly this exact location inside of a 2-dimensional space. Before we go into that 3rd dimension, let's just define the roles of each one of these axes, because these are roles that we can't ignore and will absolutely be apparent in every single thing that we do here in 3D as well. So we have 2 axes. What's this one called? X. Thank you. You're welcome. I drew it before you respond. And then this is, of course, the Y. Aliens have just invaded planet Earth, okay? Because I'm a big believer that they're moments away from invading, right? I'm like a UFO, like, super nerd. Like, beam me up, Scotty. I'm ready to do this. Like, take me to your leader. I would love to be abducted, by the way. Does anyone else want to be abducted? I'm like, let's do this. My wife thinks I'm crazy. I'm like, don't you want to go on a spaceship? I mean, let's do this. I want to give an alien like a high five, right? Anyways, okay. So aliens have just landed on planet Earth. Your job is to communicate to them and to describe the role of the x-axis. What are we doing on the x-axis? How are we plotting points? How would you define what the x-axis is really responsible for communicating? Yeah, absolutely. No, yeah. It's responsible for the horizontal values, right? So the x-axis is all horizontal stuff. So that was the hard part, right? Because the y-axis obviously is going to be the inverse of that. So what's the purpose and the role of the y-axis? Vertical. You got it. You got it. So the x-axis is all about defining points left to right, okay? The y-axis is all about up and down, okay? Horizontal and vertical. What gets sticky here is when we throw in this guy, the z-axis, right? So if the x-axis defines left and right, and the y-axis defines up and down, what in the world is the z-axis doing? Front and back. Yeah, absolutely. Depth, front and back, okay? So the z-axis is exclusive role inside of our 3D world is to define depth, front and back, okay? You know, a great way of thinking about it is, you know, the x-axis is this way, okay? Left and right. The y-axis is up and down. And the z-axis is forwards and backwards, okay? We're doing kind of what we did in 10th grade geometry in the computer, except we're having a fancy thinking machine do all the hard work for us. We're plotting points instead of a three-dimensional grid, and we're connecting those dots to make surfaces and planes that can, when connected together, create these wonderful 3D sculptures. It all comes back to 10th grade geometry. Let's turn the lights off again and continue our exploration of how all this stuff is applied inside of Modo. I'm thankful for our 3D industry because they have standardized around a couple things, one of which is the colors that represent each one of these axes. Now, it doesn't matter if you're working in Maya, Modo, Unity, or Unreal. The x-axis is always going to be represented by red. Thank you, 3D World. That makes my life easy, right? It makes going between all the apps much simpler. Y is always, always, always going to be green, and of course, blue is reserved for the z-axis, okay? I put these gigantic arrows here to help kind of illustrate the general direction that each one of these axes are going to be facing. Now, most recently, the guys and gals down at the Foundry, they just updated their app, and inside of that update, they gave us these lovely colored indicator lines on the grid of our environment that also communicates the x and the z-axis. We're never going to get one for the y-axis. We're always going to get one for the x and for the z. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty neat. Starting to see it a little bit? Okay. Okay, so naturally, we're going to want to jump in and start looking at our objects from a number of different angles instead of our scene, right? Seeing this static sculpture is cool, it's one thing, but really I want to see like the backside. I want to work on the front. I want to be able to zoom around quickly and see my model or sculpture from a number of different points of view. So how do we do that? Let's talk about the role of what we're about to accomplish here, because this is kind of a mind trip for a lot of folks, and it gets confusing. So let's just take a second and think about it. Imagine you are on the International Space Station, right? Which I've always wanted to go to, by the way. If I win the lottery, which I'm winning the lottery, because I'm a big believer in the power of positive thinking. I'm winning the lottery, right? When I win the lottery, I am buying me a maybe round trip ticket to the International Space Station, okay? Because I want to go. Have you guys ever seen those cool little jetpacks they have? The astronauts, they literally have jetpacks, the astronauts in the space station, right? They put on these jetpacks, and then they kind of like tool around the outside of the space station, right? Now, from the astronauts' perspective, not our perspective here on Mother Earth, from the astronauts' perspective, the space station is stationary, right? It's not moving. In their little jetpacks, they're kind of cruising around. The space station isn't changing its relative position. The astronauts' perspective of the space station is changing, right? It's like the space station is locked. It's not going anywhere, and we're traveling around it, right? That's kind of like what we're doing here inside of our viewport. Our models at this stage are always, always, always stationary. They don't move. We move around them, like the astronaut in the jetpack, right? We're flying around our scene and looking at our space station from any number of angles inside of our scene, okay? Let's jump in, strap our jetpacks on, and start flying around our scene and taking a look at what this model looks like from every single view inside of our three-dimensional viewport. Okay, check it out. So there's a couple keyboard controls here that we need to master, and I encourage you to get your hands dirty with this practice. It's kind of like a you don't want to have to think about this going forward, okay? You want to be so good with the viewport navigation controls that you don't want to spend any sort of time, conscious thought, if you will, thinking about it. It's like LeBron James, right? Do you think LeBron James is thinking about dribbling the basketball as he runs down the court? No, he's thinking about how to pass the ball, the play he can make, how to get his teammates involved. He doesn't want to think about those stupid mechanical things like dribbling the ball. Our world instead of 3D, or our input device instead of 3D, it requires you to have both hands, active at the exact same time. This is not like single driving, okay? 10 and 2 on your wheels. Both hands need to be participating in the control of our device. This is not like an Adobe app where you can kind of drive one-handed with the mouse exclusively. That's not us, okay? So it's going to take some practice. It's going to take some getting used to. But for us to work quickly and efficiently inside of our app, we have to have left hand on the keyboard, right hand on the mouse, okay? Left hand on the keyboard, right hand on the mouse. Specifically for me, how I kind of work with inside of our tool set is that I put my thumb, it's going to be kind of tough to see, I usually kind of have my hand on the left side of the keyboard, okay? And I usually have my thumb sitting on the command key, which is the key immediately left of the space bar. And then, of course, naturally, my right hand is on the mouse, okay? With your hands positioned on the keyboard like that, you're in a power position to very quickly leverage the keyboard shortcuts that will allow us to travel around the outside of our spaceship very quickly. So let's do it real fast. Let's jump in and start traveling around the outside of our spaceship. Now, the first command that we're going to fire off is the Option key with the left mouse button, and I'm dragging the left mouse button. This is called an orbit. Option left mouse button allows you to kind of rotate around your scene. Notice that your relative position to the center of our model here doesn't change. We're just kind of rotating around it. That's Option left mouse button. I'll write on the board so you guys can kind of see in the dark. So Option plus the left mouse button, and I'll put L and B for left mouse button, okay, is going to activate what's called the orbit command. Okay, the orbit command, which is a fancy word for rotate. And keep in mind, remember, our model is stationary. Our view is changing of a stationary model. Okay. The next one they're going to fire down is that we're going to hold down the Option and the Shift key simultaneously and then do the left mouse button. And watch how it changes. Now, we're no longer rotating our view of the scene around, but we're panning it. Our position inside of our three-dimensional space is changing. So Option plus the Shift key plus left mouse button equals the pan. And if you want to zoom in and zoom out on your scene, it's Option Control and left mouse button drag, and that's going to zoom in and zoom out. Practice this for a minute or two. Get comfortable with the keyboard navigation controls of working inside of your three-dimensional scene. So Option plus Control plus left mouse button equals zoom. Now, what's the common denominator between each one of these keyboard navigation controls? Yeah, the Option key, and of course the left mouse button as well, okay? But the Option key is going to be the one that you're always going to want to have. I think I usually have my index finger just chilling on that Option key all the time. As I mentioned before, if you get lost, so if you like zoom out to a point where, like, where is my scene? Okay. Does anyone remember the keyboard shortcut that will automatically fit the contents of your scene in the viewport? A. Yeah, don't forget that one. That's a good one. A stands for autofit. Okay, and it's going to maximize your entire scene inside of your viewport. Okay. I'm going to leave my scene just kind of panned out or zoomed out here for a second, because this allows us to see pretty quickly an important landmark inside of our three-dimensional scene. Imagine you're out in space again, okay? Did anyone see the movie Gravity with Sandra Bullock? It's a great, great film. It's actually really, really good, and it's all about basically an astronaut who has to eject from the International Space Station, right? And there's like this big disaster in space. It's really cool, right? So imagine that you're out in space, your jetpack malfunctioned, and you are spinning out of control, right? Which way's up? Which way's down? In an empty environment where there's no visual point of reference, okay, how do you get your bearings? What's up? What's down? Are there any landmarks inside of our scene that we can use to help us understand where we are, right? The Moto scene is an infinite three-dimensional space. Someone asked this question, was it last semester or a couple semesters ago now? I can't remember. If there's a boundary for our three-dimensional space, is there an actual limit to our fake little universe that we've created here? And I went, that's a really good question. Let's find out. And so what we did, because we're super nerds, is that we made a scale model of our solar system. Because I was like, there's got to be a boundary, right? And we made scale models of each one of the planets to their actual size. And then we positioned them the correct distance from each other. And lo and behold, there was no boundary. So it really is an infinite 3D space inside of our 3D inside of our viewport there. Okay. But luckily for us, the guys and gals down at the Foundry have given us some really great landmarks to help us keep our bearings, to help us understand where we are. Because in an infinite black sphere, you're going to get lost quickly. With me zoomed out this far, we see very clearly on the grid our first big landmark. It's the intersection of the blue and that red line, the X and the Z axis. The intersection of that line is the center of our universe. Going back to 10th grade geometry, what is that called? Does anyone remember? The origin. Yeah, the origin. It's the only true defined point inside of our three-dimensional space, the origin. It's the center of the universe. It's the sun, if you will. Everything rotates around the origin. Get used to seeing it. A lot of the things that we create are automatically going to be placed at the origin. In addition, if we're good modelers, and you guys are going to be good modelers here in the not-too-distant future, we can use the origin to help us create some really complex geometry quickly, right? For example, like a car model. Cars are pretty complex objects, right? Especially current cars, the current kind of industrial design of cars. There's a lot of compound curves on those things, right? They're not easy shapes to capture. Well, instead of trying to model the entire car, what if we model half of it? And then we ask the computer to duplicate the other side for us. Because cars are symmetrical. If we use the origin correctly, it can enhance our modeling workflow. Okay? It's an important landmark for us, the origin. So that's one place inside of our three-dimensional scene that we can begin to understand, to help us understand where we are. Okay, so I hit the A key, zoomed back in. Let's figure out some of the other ways that we can keep our bearings here and understand what's up and down and left and right. Because in a world where we can tumble upside down and rotate our view any which way, how can we communicate pretty quickly what is up and what is down, right? How do I know which way is up? How do I know which way is down? Luckily, we happen to be using these gigantic arrows, which helps us out a little bit. Let's also use two other parts of the Moto interface to really help us understand the areas of our scene that we commonly refer to as up and as down, the sky and the ground itself. Has anyone figured out what part of the motor interface very quickly communicates to us where up is?
The light.
Got it. That gradient in the background. And they've done this very intelligently, in my opinion. The light part of the gradient is up. The dark part of the gradient in the background is down. It's the ground. Okay? Now, why is it? Yeah, go ahead. Read my mind. I was going right. Absolutely. It's called the compass. And the compass is the best way to understand up and down, because we can turn that gradient on and off, but you can't turn that compass on and off. Okay? Now, why is this important? Why do we want to be concerned about up and down? So you don't build upside down. Yeah, it really is as simple as that. And I apologize. I shouldn't have erased my Cartesian grid. But here, I'll make a smaller version of it over here. Okay, so in our 2D Cartesian grid, naturally we have the x and the y axes. We have these great ruler markers. Awesome. Okay. Let's go back to math class for a second here. If you take this grid, it's easily broken into 4 quadrants. There's one quadrant that you'll be able to plot positive values for both the x and the y. Pop quiz. Which one is it? You have a 1 in 4 chance of getting this right. So is it this one, this one, this one, or that one? Let's get specific here. So is it quadrant 1, 2, 3, or 4? It's 2, quadrant 2. Okay? Quadrant 2 is the only quadrant in a 2D Cartesian grid where we can plot positive values for both the x and the y axes, right? Because we start, this is 1, 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth, and then we count this way. What are these? Negative values, right. So this would be -1, then same down going down this way. This is -1 of the y, -2, so on and so forth, okay? The positive and negative values of our 2D Cartesian grid represent defined directions inside of our three-dimensional scene, okay? Let me show it to you. Positive y is up. So whenever we're working on the positive side of the y-axis, we're working on the top of things. Inversely, if we're working on the negative side of the y-axis, below the grid, if you will, we're working on the bottom of something, okay? Now, I don't have the z-axis plotted in here. The same goes for the z, okay? It has positive values and negative values. Take a guess for a second. If I wanted to work on the front of a model, which side of the z-axis am I going to be working on? A positive, you got it. Ultimately, if we can figure out the positive side of 2 of our 3 axes, we've got it, right? Because that third one will take care of itself just by how our universe is set up, okay? For most folks, the z and the y are the ones that we really need to focus our energy on, because left and right can be kind of arbitrary. Is it my left or is it Frank's left? I don't know, right? But if we can figure out the top of an object and the front of an object, we're good to go. Let's pretend we're modeling a character, and when you model characters, you model them at what's called the T-pose. A character with their appendages at their full extremities, right? That's the easiest way to model something. Well, which direction should I have the nose of my character facing inside of our scene? Yeah, towards the camera's position can be arbitrary, right? So let's figure out specifically. Which direction do you think? Positive Z, you got it, towards the front of our scene, right? So where should the top of the head be pointed? Positive Y, you got it, okay? So the positive areas of our X, Y, and Z axes kind of showcase and point to specific kind of common, ideas of up, down, left, and right. Without, a model like I have given you guys with gigantic arrows, the only thing to really communicate this stuff cleanly to us is the compass, okay? And the compass is in the lower left-hand corner of our viewport. Let me just put it in a position, or put my scene in a position that will allow us to check it out pretty directly. That right there is our compass, okay? Imagine that each one of the lines coming from that compass is like an arrow. So the letters at the end of those lines, think of them like arrows. Those arrows are always pointing towards the positive area of that axis, okay? So based on the compass information that you can see here, which direction inside of my 3D scene is the positive Z area? Remember, that blue line is like an arrow. So point to it in the classroom. That way. You got it. That way is the front of our scene. That way. Which way is the top of our scene? Up. You got it. And the left is over there. Okay? The compass is always going to point to the positive areas of their axes. Okay? Now this is incredibly helpful because when I'm working and I'm navigating around, I can flip my view pretty quickly here. And now, what was up is now down, but visually, I can still understand the positive area of the y-axis by examining the contents of the compass, okay? That compass does a fantastic job of helping us retain our bearings in an infinite black space, okay? In an infinite 3D space where there are no landmarks, okay? Just the compass. So get used to seeing it. It is really a good, helpful guide. Oops. All right. Questions on that? Kind of getting it? Feeling it? All right. Rock and roll. Okay. So let's do this. Let's have some fun here. Because working inside of our three-dimensional scene or flying around our three-dimensional scene is one thing, but ultimately we need to work inside of this viewport. We need to jump in and select some stuff and move it around and scale it and rotate it and really start constructing some objects that will ultimately turn into some really great sculptures. To do this, let's learn how we can work with inside of the selection system. And I think here's what I want you guys to do real fast. I want you to go to the top of the screen where it says File, and I want you to choose New. We're going to create a new project file that doesn't have those big arrows in it, okay? So in every sense, this is what your scene should look like, just empty, right? Let's put something in there. Let's put an object that we can work with inside of our three-dimensional scene. If we go to the top of the screen where it says Geometry, the pull-down menus at the top of the screen, Geometry, there we go. And next, we're going to go Unit Primitives. Let me zoom out so you guys can see it all the way. In Current Mesh, Teapot. And that's going to put the good old classic University of Utah teapot inside of our scene. There it is. There she blows. Woo! We did it. Our first model, congratulations. Great job. I knew you could do it. Okay. Practice for a second, just orbiting around your little teapot. Look at it from all sides. Get comfortable looking at this little teapot. Take it for a spin. Literally take it for a spin if you want to orbit around it. You'll be seeing this teapot often inside of our 3D graphics world. This is classified as the University of Utah teapot. The granddaddies of our industry did their research in computer graphics, 3D computer graphics at the University of Utah. And in every sense, we have to thank Ed Catmull for his contributions to the world of computer graphics. Ed Catmull is going to be a pretty influential force in our industry for many years to come. He created many of the core, infrastructure that we use in the 3D community. He did the science on it. He came up with the algorithms and the math that generate all this stuff, right? He's an active guy in our world still. Does anyone know where Ed Catmull currently works? I wish. Actually, existentially, if you look at his history, he did work at ILM. Ed Catmull was hired by George Lucas way back in the early 80s. And Ed Catmull and all these, well, I've forgotten his last name already. I'm having a brain dump. I've gotten like 3 hours of sleep, so I apologize. anyways, Ed Catmull and his team were hired by George Lucas in the early 80s to start the original ILM Computer Graphics Group, right? The ILM Computers Graphics Group did a whole bunch of fantastic little small animations, computer animations for some feature films. One that's coming to the top of my mind was in at the very, very end of Wrath of Khan, Star Trek, the first Wrath of Khan film, not Into Darkness, the reboot of Wrath of Khan. And there's a lovely computer animation at the end of that film that they did. And then, they kind of said to George, hey, what we really want to do is that we really want to make films, with computers. We don't want to make just special effects. I mean, they're cool. I mean, they're fun. But we're really interested in being, filmmakers, not just, visual effects guys and gals. And George said, no, I'm not interested in that. If you want to go do that, that's fine. But I'm going to take all the research and the stuff that you guys built and learned, and I'm going to keep all of that, okay, because it's mine, because I paid for it, right? And I'm going to incorporate it into Industrial Light and Magic. And if you guys really want to go do your own thing, I have no problem with that. I'll sell the Computer Graphics Group. And that's what we did. Does anyone know who George Lucas sold the original ILM Computer Graphics to?
Wasn't it Steve Jobs?
It was Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs. And Steve Jobs' exile from Apple, he purchased the original ILM Computer Graphics Group and renamed it Pixar. Yeah, pretty cool, huh? And Ed Catmull is one of the 3 founding members of Pixar. Ed Catmull is the computer scientist. Steve Jobs is the money, basically. It really was. He was the money. Yeah, he was the financier. And then John Lasseter was the animator. Okay? And those 3 started what we now know to be, of course, Pixar Animation Studios. The original, if you ever want a really great read, and this is total side note, Ed Catmull has written a book called Creativity, Inc. And it's kind of a history of Pixar, and is really designed to be kind of his memoirs on how to manage a creative team, in a very technical workflow, and it's a great read. It's a really great read. One of the cool little things that I had seen before, but they drew focus to in Pixar in the book, was, does anyone know how it got named Pixar? Pixar was the name of a machine. It was the name of a computer that Ed Catmull and his team had created and built while working for George Lucas. And George had no interest in selling machines. And Pixar's original job, what they first did for a couple years after they were sold, was they sold computers. They tried to sell people their $250,000 computer graphics machine, right? And of course, at that time, very few people were interested in buying a $250,000 computer that did computer graphics, right? I have no idea, and I don't think they said in the book, but they definitely implied that it was high end. Yeah. They sold very few of them. And then finally they said, you know what, let's start making films, and the rest is history. So that's kind of cool. Anyways, this model comes from Ed Catmull's study at University of Utah. So it's one of those models that you see everywhere, because in every sense it's kind of one of the first 3D models. It's been updated from time to time, but that's the shape. Anyways, all right, let's get back into it. So we're comfortable at this point navigating around our viewport and checking out our model from a number of different directions. But let's go in and start working with this model. Now, Moto has a real interesting kind of mantra, if you will. That is, everything begins and ends with a selection, okay? If we want to manipulate an object, if we want to make it grow or move it around or rotate it, the first thing that we have to do is select it, okay? Whatever is selected inside of our three-dimensional scene is what's going to be edited. If nothing is selected, everything is going to be edited, okay? So how do we know visually inside of our scene that we've selected a piece of geometry or an item? It's orange, and get used to seeing that orange color. If you look carefully at my screen here, you can see that this object's wireframes are that lovely selected orange color. This is a convention that you'll see all over the application. Orange is the highlight or selected color, even as far as the buttons at the top of the screen, okay? You can see them in item mode, and those two colors are the same. You'll see it all over the place, okay? All right. So if you don't have your little teapot selected, here's what you do. Just put your cursor over it. When you mouse over something that you can select, you can see that the wireframes give us this lovely rollover highlight color, denoting to us that this is the object that we would select if we were to left click. Let's just do it. Left click, oops, selects an object. Okay. Now at this stage, we are currently working at item level. The world of computer graphics is nothing more than a whole series, a whole series of hierarchies. Okay. Now when I say a hierarchy, what in the world am I talking about? And here come the lights one more time. What's a hierarchy? Yeah, I love that. An order of power. That's a great way of thinking about it, right? Okay, here we go. So an order of power. So if we went back into medieval times, you know, the king is at the top of the hierarchy, the king or the queen is at the top of the hierarchy, and then you have like the knights that were slightly below them, and then you have like, I don't know, like the nobles. Sure, I mean, there's a whole hierarchy of folks inside, you know, of that order, right? And I remember from history class that the serfs were the bottom of the hierarchy, like the peons that worked out in the fields that had like no power, right? Well, we kind of work in a similar hierarchy inside the world of computer graphics. Our hierarchy is a little bit different, though. Now, if you're used to working in computers, you're already pre-built, and you already understand how to work inside of hierarchies. You do it every time you open or nest a folder inside of another folder, right? It's an order of things. In our world, the top of the food chain, the king of our castle, is called an item. Okay? An item. Now, there are a number of different types of items inside of Modo. There are a bunch of them. Everything from mesh items and cameras and lights and dynamic items and particle systems and volumetric items. I mean, there are hundreds of items that you will learn and grow into as you get more experience working in 3D. But for the next couple of weeks, we're going to keep it pretty simple. We're going to work with a mesh item, basically a model. So it's the top of the food chain for us. It's the top of our hierarchy. There are a number of components that are associated with this item, okay? Think of it like this, okay? We have a car, right? But the car is really built from a number of different component pieces, right? What would be some of the component pieces associated with the car? The wheels, yeah, absolutely. The engine, the transmission, of course you got to have a banging stereo, right? Got to have it. Okay, these are all component pieces. When we combine all these component pieces together, we have a car, all right? In our world, in the mesh item world, we have three major components that we're going to be working with. The low one on the food chain, and let's put it visually at the bottom. The low man on the totem pole is a vertex. A vertex. What in the world is a vertex? Does anyone know? Perfect. It's a point. It's a dot in space. The computer understands its location, but it's nothing more than just a single dot. Okay? By itself, it's kind of meaningless in the 3D modeling workflow. When you get to GCOM 410, our advanced computer animation class, we'll start to look at how we can use these vertices to make particle effects. They have a big role in advanced duplication and something called a replicator. There is a role for them individually, but right now they're kind of meaningless, okay? One dot by itself doesn't make a model. However, when we add a second dot together, we create the next component, which is an edge. So the moment we add a second dot into the mix and connect them, we now create what's called an edge, okay? An edge. And last but certainly not least, a polygon. Now, when it comes to polygons, how many verts do we need to define a polygon? 3. 3. Okay? Believe it or not, we add a third one into the mix. We connect the dots. What do we get? Triangle. Okay? So we have we have 3 different surface types, 3 different polygons that we work with in here. Okay? We have a triangle. Then someone said it before, you add a 4th dot into the mix. 1, 2, 3, and 4. Connect all the dots. Okay? That is not a square. It looks like a square. But this is a quad polygon. Okay? A surface with 4 vertices associated with it is defined as a quad polygon. Okay? The last surface type that we have is called an n-gon. You can't select n-gons because they're classified under this component type. But as one might imagine, and what I'm saying n-gon, by the way. N-gon. In the world of math, what does this n mean? I bet you guys didn't think there was going to be this much math today, didn't you? Any number. You got it. So it's basically a surface with more than 4 sides to it, or more than 4 verts associated with it. Okay? N-gons are something that we should always strive to eliminate. We don't like the n-gons. We can build them. We can work with them inside the world of computer graphics. But they're not we don't want to end up with n-gons. Certain rendering engines don't understand what an n-gon is, right? Certain rendering engines, like a game engine, for example, they only understand what a triangle is. They only render tris. They don't render quads. They render tris. Which of these 2 should we be striving to create? Which is the gold standard? Why? And you're right. Because there's 2 triangles put together. Because I can transform any quad polygon into 2 triangles. Okay, just by slicing them down diagonally from corner to corner. Okay? Quad polygons are the gold standard for us. They're the most cross-platform surface type inside of our industry. They're highly extensible. They're very editable. They're very easy to work with. And if we need to triangulate them, the computer can do that quite beautifully for us. They're the most flexible, powerful surface type in our arsenal, if you will. Now, I bring this up because you're going to be working with vertices, edges, and polygons all the time, okay? We're going to be building with these components. And then eventually, at the end of the day, if we do our job right, these components in here will generate an item that looks like a car, okay? We can select inside of these levels of our hierarchy. We've been selecting our teapot at the item level, and note that the entire item is orange, right? All the wireframes are orange. But what if I want to go in and just work or just move, I don't know, the spout or a portion of our teapot down here in the body of it? Well, if I want to select a vertice, edge, or polygon, I need to change our selection state, which are these buttons in here. Okay? Vertices, edges, polygons. We'll skip materials for the time being, then items. So I get to select and work with the entire car, or I can go in and just grab the wheels and work at that level as well. Okay? Clicking on these buttons will filter the system to only select those component pieces. Okay? Let's check it out real fast. I want to go over to my polygon selection set. And by clicking on it, let me zoom out some so you can see what's going on. There we go. All right. So by clicking on that button, now we're only ever going to select the polygons on our mesh, right? Selecting polygons or any component for that matter is really, really easy. Just simply left-clicking on the component will select it. Much like we saw in item mode, we'll get a lovely little rollover highlight color when we roll over a polygon. And then left-clicking on it will select it. What if I wanted to add some polygons to this selection? How do I do that? Yeah. Left-click and drag. I like that. Yeah, absolutely. Modo has a paintbrush selection system. So if you left-click and drag over the model, anything that you roll over is going to be selected. That's pretty neat. Okay? How else can we add some polygons to a selection? Yeah, the shift key, just like over in Photoshop, right? If you hold down the shift key in Photoshop and in Modo, you'll add some additional components to that selection. What if I goofed, okay, and I messed up, and I want to subtract some polygons from a selection? Do I have to reselect everything? No, yeah, just hold down the control key and just simply left-click on the polygons that you want to eliminate from your selection. Here we go. Maybe I don't want this top row, so I'm going to hold down the control key and left-click and drag on the polygons I don't want to work with. Okay. From time to time, we're going to want to deselect everything. If I have a lot of polygons in here, I'm not going to go in and hold down the control key and roll over all of them. How do I deselect everything? Yeah, you got it. Just click off the model in the background of our scene. Notice where my cursor is. It's way out over here in the upper right-hand corner of our interface. And if you just left-click up there, it goes away. We drop the selection. So the left mouse button will allow us to go in and select things. The control and shift key, in addition to the left mouse button, will allow us to add and subtract components from an existing selection. And then left-clicking on the background of our scene will drop everything and allow us to start a new selection from scratch. Okay, I'm going to zoom out here for a second. I want to show you some other really cool selections, other cool selection tools that will help us very quickly get what we're after. Because believe it or not, selecting things is kind of a bread and butter idea for us. We're going to be doing this often, right? Our little teapot is actually 3 separate pieces. We have the spout, the body, and the handle on the back. This is absolutely allowed, okay? These, huh? It's 3. Yeah, the lid is actually glued to the base, so. But it's 3 separate polygonal pieces. I can select, these are called contiguous polygonal islands, or excuse me, discontiguous polygonal islands, because they're not welded together. And that's fine. We're allowed to do this. This is absolutely legit, where we can bury polygonal islands into each other to get the result that we're after. This is totally fine, okay? Now, inside of Modo, if you double-click on a polygonal island, it selects all the polygons that are connected to that piece. So a double-click will select all the polygons selected to that part of the model. Once again, our Shift and Control keyboard modifiers will allow us to very quickly add or subtract big portions of our mesh by pairing it with that double-click convention. All right, so we can left mouse button and drag on our model to select things. I can double-click on our models to select all the pieces that have been welded together. There's also one other selection system that will allow us to very quickly go in and grab huge swaths of component pieces very quickly. And that is the right mouse button. The right mouse button, if you right mouse button and drag, you're going to create a box or a marquee selection. Now, if you don't have a box, if you're getting a weird squiggly line, let me show you how to change it, because I hate that weird squiggly line. It just doesn't work for me, okay? If you go to the top of the screen where it says Select, down here at the bottom we have Lasso Style. Me personally, I like rectangle. If you just do lasso, this is what you get. And some people like the lasso. It just doesn't work for my brain. It turns into this weird squiggly line thing, and whatever's on the inside of that squiggly line is going to be selected. Some people live and breathe by it. I find it just frustrating. I guess I have jittery hands, so it doesn't work well for me. Change it. Use whatever is comfortable for you. I want to change this back to rectangle here real fast. All right. So the right mouse button will allow us to grab huge swaths of component pieces inside of our system. Whatever's in the box is going to be selected, okay? Look carefully at my teapot, though. Is everything selected? No, not at all, right? I can see portions of the lid that aren't selected, and check it out. If I go around And if I orbit around to the back of the model, whoa, none of that's selected. Now, what's going on here, you think? You got it. It's just selecting the polygons that are facing you as the user. The polygons that are facing me are the ones that are being selected. The polygons that are facing the opposite direction are not being selected. This is an important distinction to make because a lot of people think that they're selecting through their mesh when they use the right mouse button. You're not. You're only selecting the forward-facing polygons. Yeah, go ahead.
How do you select the forward-facing polygons?
Right mouse button and drag. Right mouse button?
Right.
That's left.
Okay, my bad.
There you go.
Right and drag.
There it is. Yep.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
And it's only what's facing.
It's only what's facing us. You got it. From time to time, actually I'd say more often than not, you're going to want to select through your mesh and grab everything, right? To do that, it's middle mouse button and drag, okay? I'm holding down the middle mouse button. I get the exact same behavior of the tool, but now watch what happens when I mouse up. Oops. Yeah, I got everything. So right mouse button is going to select the forward-facing polygons, and then the middle mouse button and drag is going to get everything. The front and the back. Everything, whatever is inside the box with the middle mouse button is going to be selected. Pretty neat, huh?
What's a middle mouse button?
The scroll wheel. That's the middle mouse button. You got it? Okay. Okie dokie day. Questions on how to select things inside of Modo. You know, I've been going for about an hour and a half. I think now is a good time to take a small little break. Sound good? All right. Let's get up, stretch your legs, take a break. There we go. All right, let's get back to it, shall we, guys? Okay, so before we went on our break, we were talking a lot about selecting things. And believe it or not, selecting things is going to be one of those elements that we're going to be doing all the time, because if you really take a step back and look at it, we're going to create some geometry, then we're going to go in and start selecting a whole bunch of parts and pieces and continue to edit, expand, and work with it. So get comfortable with the selection system inside of Modo. It's pretty neat, okay? And it's pretty easy to use. Remember our big underlying kind of structure here when it comes to working with stuff. Whatever is selected will be changed, okay? If nothing is selected, everything will be changed. And let me illustrate that idea pretty directly for you, okay? So before break, we were selecting the different parts and pieces of our little teapot. Let's take a look at it again real fast. And this will also give us a really great opportunity to work with some tools. Maybe I don't like the size of the spout of my teapot, and I want to make it a little bit bigger. I'll perhaps move it or rotate it to a different spot on the teapot itself. By selecting it, I'm filtering and directing the tools inside of my workflow to only edit the geometry that's associated with the selection. So keep that in mind, all right? Let's fire off our first tool. So with my spout selected, I can travel way over here into our basic tool tab, and where we can find the home to our move, rotate, and scale tool, the basic transformation tools. Much like selecting things, you're going to be moving and rotating and scaling stuff all the time. So let's take a look at how each one of these tools work individually. You can find the move, rotate, and scale tools right here. Let's fire off the move tool. Whoop. Okay. By clicking on the tool, we activate the tool. We know the tool is on by looking at its background color. It's kind of like your car, right? You jump into your car. Of course, after you put your seatbelt on, safety first, right? Click, click. And then what's the first thing you do to get your car going? Turn it on, right? You put your key in, you start the ignition, the car comes to life. We do the exact same thing. We turn the tool on, we drive the tool to work, and then when we're done working with the tool, we turn the tool off. While the tool is on, the button's background color is going to be orange. And if you zoom out and look what's happening inside of our viewport, we get some tool handles, and you can see them just chilling in the center of my selection. There they are. These arrows will allow us to move the selected component along each of our three axes. Grabbing the red one's going to be the X, green is Y, and the blue is the Z. So if you grab a tool, and then left click and drag on it, you can see that we can now start to move this item around our scene. Now what about these little discs? You see those little discs here, these things? These are called coplanar handles. The arrows allow us to move this object along one axis, but the little discs allow us to move this spout along two axes simultaneously. Okay? It's pretty neat. Like let's say I don't want to move the spout up and down, but I want to move it along the XZ plane. And here's how I figured it out. You grab the handle that represents the axes you don't want to move this object along. I don't want to move it up and down along the green, okay, arrow. So I grab the green handle. And now, oops, it did that because I'm all zoomed in. I grab the green coplanar handle, then it moves that object exclusively along the X and the Z. So with that in mind, if I was to grab the red handle here, the red coplanar handle, which two axes am I going to move this object along? Y and Z. You got it. And of course, the blue one is going to be the X and the Y. So keep that in mind. It's a really neat addition because sometimes moving things accurately along two axes is exactly what the doctor ordered. Okay? So that's the move tool. That's the move tool. Excuse me. All right. So we turn a tool on by clicking on its button. How do we turn a tool off? Because if we keep it on, and keep this in mind, if we keep this tool on, it's going to continue to affect everything inside of our scene. So we need to turn it off the moment we're done with it. Because if we leave it on, that's a recipe for trouble pretty quickly because it could mess up something we don't want to mess up. All right? So we turn a tool on by clicking on its button. How do we turn a tool off? By clicking on its button. You got it. You got it. It's just that easy. So if we return to the Move Tool icon in the toolbar and click on it one more time, now that tool is off. Yes, ma'am. That's a good question. Escape also works. There's actually two other ways in addition to the escape tool that you can turn off a tool. Let's explore those in tandem with some other tools. I still have the spout of my teapot selected. This tool right here is the rotate tool. Okay? If you fire off the rotate tool, you get some nice rings inside of our interface, which will allow us to rotate our object along a very specific axis. Okay? Be mindful of which ring you're selecting. You can get in trouble pretty quickly with the rotate tool. Okay? Check it out. Only rotate when you're on a handle. Okay? And because I'm zoomed in, it's going haywire. Only rotate when you've selected a handle. That way you know as the user precisely what direction you're rotating this object along. If you just click in the center, well, don't click in the center, okay? Because then you're rotating this into unknown angles along unknown degrees, and no, okay. I don't know how to fix this now, okay? As 3D modelers, and you probably have already gotten this a little bit, you need to be kind of like a control freak, okay? Because you are sitting in front of a very complex machine. Only you can prevent forest fires, okay? You are the driver of this machine. Yes?
When I click to rotate mine likes to warp around.
Well, that's fun. Ah, I see. Somehow, you activated your symmetry. Try now. Ah, there it is. Yep. So be careful with these tools, okay? These tools are our best friend, but at the same time, Moto's not going to pull any punches. It's going to assume that you know what you're doing. So know what you're doing, okay? That way you don't accidentally mess something up. Now, earlier we were talking about, deactivating and turning off a tool. And with the Move tool, we just went up and clicked on the button. There's actually 3 ways that we can turn off a tool. What was your name again? Pam. Escape key. Great job, Pam. Awesome work. There's also 2 other ways in addition to turning it to the escape key that we can turn off the tool. Here's kind of a favorite of mine. You'll see people doing this all the time out there in the Motoverse, okay? And it's tapping the space bar. Tapping your space bar will turn off the tool. You'll hear folks refer to this as dropping the tool, but just tapping the space bar will turn off an active tool. There it is. Bye-bye. Okay? So we can click on the button, or we can tap the space bar, or we can hit the escape key to all turn off the tool once we're done with it. Let's look at the scale tool, and we'll also look at the last way that we can turn off a tool. The scale tool is right next to its neighbor, the rotate tool. And with it on, we get these tool handles. They're pretty cool. As one might imagine, we can make our object bigger or smaller along a specific axis. So if I grab this red handle, I can make it pretty fat like that, which is kind of neat. Okay. These little discs will allow us to, again, scale along 2 axes simultaneously. Okay. How in the world, though, do I make it uniformly bigger? Can I scale this object along all 3? Yes, the center circle, that light blue circle at the intersection of all these little lines and their tool handles will allow us to uniformly scale this object bigger or smaller. So we're scaling it along all 3 axes at the exact same time, which is kind of nice. The last way you can deactivate a tool is to hit the Q key on your keyboard, which technically activates the selection tool. Okay? Now, I want you to look down. As you hit the Q key on your keyboard, you probably noticed that the tool handles have gone away. It's a good indication that the tool is off. But look at the cluster of keys on that row. Okay? The Q key is the selection tool. Its neighbor to the right is the W key. What turns that on? The move tool. The E key, which is, again, to the right. Rotate. And R is scale. Q, W, E, and R. The basic transform tools are all grouped together right next to each other on the keyboard to make it very easy to go in and out of. Okay? You're more than welcome and encouraged to use the buttons in the toolbar, but the Q, W, E, and R are a great, great collection of tools that will help you activate, move, rotate, and scale quickly. Okay? In addition, these are industry standard key bindings. Okay? So if you go over into Maya, guess what's the key binding for the move tool? The W key. If you go over into Unity and you need to rotate some of your game objects in Unity, guess what the key binding is? E. Okay? Same with the scale, it's R. We've standardized around a couple things. Thankfully, move, rotate, and scale are one of the few things that we standardize between all the apps.
Is there like a go back button, like you know how like Photoshop you go to edit and then you go to I think it was undo?
Yep. We got the exact same thing. Edit, undo. Command Z. Yeah. Oh, yes. So, yeah, the Q is the selection tool, and it will turn off. Yeah, it'll turn off everything else. It's an easy, quick way of deactivating a tool. All right. So we've been working with the spout of my teapot for a little bit. If I go in and select portions of my teapot, like I did a second ago, I can move it around. And in every sense, this illustrates quite beautifully the selection system inside of Modo. We've selected something and then moved it. Now watch what happens. And I'm going to leave my teeth. Let's do this. Let's make a really extreme example here so it's real obvious to see what's going on. I'm going to drop the tool by tapping the space bar, double click on the handle, and move it like way out over there. Okay. That's what I have on my screen. Now watch what happens when I don't select anything. Okay? What do you think is going to happen? Yeah, check it out. Nothing is selected. And when I grab, let's do the rotate tool. Grab rotate, everything changes. Okay? If we want to work with a specific collection of components, we have to select it. If nothing is selected, everything is selected. Okay? That's the kind of the foundation of the Modo selection system. It's just like Photoshop, by the way. It's nice that Modo is kind of landing on our doorsteps a number of years after, apps like Photoshop and Maya have really matured, because they can take advantage of some kind of, ubiquitous input methods that we see in other apps and bring them to the foreground. I like that. All right, questions on what we've gone over so far? Okay. From time to time, you're going to find yourself in a hole, and you're going to need to delete something, right? To start over. Let's pretend that my teapot is just, a steaming pile, and I don't like it, and I want to make a new teapot, right? How in the world do I get rid of existing geometry? It's just that easy, and you're absolutely right. Let's go in. I'm going to double click on the spout, and I'll zoom out so we can see little other parts and pieces here. And I'm going to hit the delete key. However, look down at your keyboard for a second. Okay? Look down at your keyboard. The delete key is going to delete geometry. I pose to you an interesting question. Which delete key? Because there's two of them. Seriously, there's two delete keys. I love all things Apple, but I don't know why in the world they decided to give us two keys that both say delete, right? You have this one, commonly referred to as the backspace key, unlike every other keyboard known to man. That right there is the backspace key. And then this one, okay, right above the arrows, is the delete key, okay? So which one do you do? Let's find out. There is a difference. There is a difference. Technically, they both delete things, but however, there is a very, very small difference between them. That difference can only really be seen when we have the visibility of our vertices on, okay? Right now, the way I'm shading my OpenGL viewport, I only see the edges and the polygons on my mesh. The verts are there. They're just not being shown at the moment. So let's turn them on. And it brings open a really great customization panel that changes how and what is going to be drawn inside of our viewport. So with my cursor just chilling in the center of the viewport, I'm going to hit the O key, which is going to pop open our viewport properties form. Okay? Now this viewport properties form is pretty neat. If you click on the top here, you can move it around anywhere you want to go. This button right here is going to pin it. It's going to stop it from being dismissed, okay? This is not the close button, this little circle up here. This pins the form to the interface, okay? The way to dismiss the form is just to click off of it, and it goes away. If you pin it by clicking on the little circle, then when you click, see how the form doesn't go away? It's a standard mode of convention that you'll see in a lot of these popovers. Okay. So let's go find where we can turn on the visibility of our vertices inside of our viewport properties. Now we'll be going in and out of this form again in the not too distant future, but for today let's cruise over to the active meshes section. So the vertical tab that says active meshes. And we have an option here. Now depending on how you've set up your Modo or who's been working with Modo before you, this show vertices command in your viewport properties may be looking a little bit different, okay? And once again, just to keep everyone up to speed here, I've gotten to that form by hitting the O key. O is in October with my cursor inside the viewport. And I've navigated over to the active meshes section of said viewport, or said form, excuse me. All right. Right now, my Modo has been changed, because I like it like this, to only show the vertices when I'm in the vertex selection mode, okay? There are a couple options in here. There's always, which I'm not sure why you'd want to have that on. And then you can see the little black dots appear on the surface of your model. There's in component modes. That way, you know, I can be in vert, edge, or polygon mode. I always see my verts, okay? Or in vertex mode or never. I like having mine in vertex mode. That way, when I change my selection state over to vertices, I'll see all the verts show up on my mesh. Okay, and I'm going to do this just to make it a little bit easier for you guys in the back to see what's going on. Once again, I'm going to return to my viewport properties in the active meshes section, and I'm going to enable independent point size. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing it to make it easier for you guys to see these small little dots on a very big screen. Maybe a little too big. There we go. Can you guys see them now? Yeah, there we go. Those little black dots are the verts on my model, right? The vert, or, keep in mind, is the basic building block of all things 3D model. It's the lowest component inside of our hierarchy. Everything is built from a vert, and now we're visualizing and seeing all the verts inside of our model. I bring this to your attention because this has everything to do with the deletion of our model. Okay? Check it out. I'm going to go into my component selection mode real fast. Well, let's do this. I'm going to do show vertices in all component modes. That way, they're always on. And if I grab my mesh in my polygonal selection state and hit the backspace key, the backspace key, what happens? They're still there. The backspace key is only ever going to delete the surface. It doesn't delete all of its connected components, okay? So all those verts are still chilling in our scene, which is no bueno, okay? This is bad modeling. This is horrific modeling, okay? We don't want to do this. The delete key, the one immediately above your arrows, okay, on your keyboard, is going to be your jam, okay? You hit the delete key, and you see that the polygons and their associated verts get eliminated immediately. Yeah.
What about on laptops?
So it'd be function delete. Yeah. Yeah, I have that problem on my laptop. I don't have my delete key, and this just kind of drives me crazy. My delete key is actually the backspace key. And then function backspace key serves as the delete key. Is that clear as mud to everyone? There is a difference between the two keys, okay? So with that in mind, we can very quickly clean up our scene and get rid of all the other pieces of our model. So delete, and we've cleaned out our mesh. Actually, let me show you something here real fast. I think you'll like this. All right. If you go over to the right side of your interface, and I've zoomed in just to make it a little bit easier for the folks in the back to see. If you go over to the right side of your interface and examine the contents of your item list, all of the geometry that we've been created and working with for our teapot has been placed on that mesh item, right? The little blue icon, little blue cube icon represents geometry. Think of this item like a gigantic container. It's a bucket full of vertices, edges, and polygons. That's all it is, right? At the moment, we have some verts and some edges and polys in that bucket. If you look at the way the computer is displaying the text associated with this mesh item, it's all nice and dark and bold, okay? However, check it out. If I delete that geometry, what happens to the text on that mesh item? Yeah, it grays out. That's the Modo way of saying that there's nothing in here. The container is still available for me to put stuff in, but it's empty. It's an empty mesh item. All right. So now that we've cleaned up our scene, got rid of all that teapot stuff, let's talk about how we can use our basic shape creation tools. And let's create some stuff. This will be fun. And I love creating stuff. This is going to be great. The basic shape creation tools can be found over in our basic tools section. These guys. These are our basic shape creation tools, and there are a bunch of them, okay? You can make squares and spheres, cylinders, cones, torus, which is really just a fancy word for donut. Man, I love donuts, right? I can't honestly think of a better breakfast pastry. Maybe the strudel, the breakfast strudels, those are pretty great, right? I don't know. For me personally, donuts are pretty fantastic, right? Anyway, the bear claws are up there. I forgot about bear claws. They're pretty badass. Okay, anyways. Clearly, I'm hungry right now. So these are all this is where we're going to go to make stuff, okay? Because it's not all about just like, editing and working with existing geometry. We want to build our own stuff, okay? Let's build some stuff here real fast. Let's make some shapes. And first and foremost, let's start off by creating a square. Now, the system is very similar to that of the tools that we used earlier, but because we're creating geometry instead of editing existing geometry, our workflow is going to change ever so slightly. Much like we did with the move tool, if we turn it on, boom, okay? The background color for that tool goes orange, rock and roll, I like this. We get a whole bunch of tool options down here, good, okay? The car's warming up now. But we don't stomp on the accelerator and actually go somewhere until we physically click and drag in the viewport. At this point, we've just turned the car on. To actually go somewhere with the shape creation tools, we have to left click and drag. when you left click and drag, you're going to see that the square tool, the cube tool, allows us to create, obviously, a basic rectangular shape. The handles around the outside allow us to rescale this square to any sort of user-defined parameter. You can grab this little green guy and make it shorter. This little blue one on the outside will allow us to change it going that way. If you look real carefully in the center of the tool handle, we have some translation tools, translation arrows that will allow us to change the position of this cube when we create it, which is kind of nice, okay? Before you turn off your tool, travel around to the back side. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Is this a 3D cube? No. This is a two-dimensional cube. All shapes, when we draw them inside of Modo, are inherently going to be two-dimensional. And then we have to transform them into a three-dimensional shape. With the cube tool in the center here, these will move our cube around. But this red square, if we click on the red square, and it may be a different color on your screen depending on which way you've drawn your cube. But if you left click and drag on that inside cube, then you'll be able to extrude it along that axis and make it a three-dimensional cube. Cool, huh? Now, I'm pretty happy with the size and the shape of this cube. I'm done working with the cube tool. What's next? Circle is next, but what do we got to do before we even get to that point? I like the way you're thinking of it now. We got to turn the tool off, right? We turn the tool on, we build with it, then we turn it off, okay? How do I turn it off? There's 4 ways we talked about how to deactivate a tool. What's one of them? Q key, absolutely. That'll turn it off. Escape key, space bar, I like it. And last but certainly not least, clicking on the button. You got it. Do one of those 4 and we'll be happy campers. Okay? There's a square. Congratulations, you just made your first piece of 3D geometry. I knew you could do it. I knew it. You guys are awesome. All right. Here's what I want you to do, is that I want you to get rid of your cube just for a second here. And I want you to spend some time, believe it or not, with the cylinder tool, because the cylinder tool is going to be one that you're going to use often. And believe it or not, making perfect circles inside of 3D is not impossible, but it takes some energy to do, okay? Making squares and making circles is the kind of what we do for a living instead of 3D, okay? So let's talk about how we can work with the cylinder tool. Not the sphere tool, which is going to make a soccer ball, but a cylinder tool, which is going to make a tube, okay? Let's fire it off. Now, much like our square tool, if I left click and drag, you can see that I can drag out a shape, any shape I want, which is kind of nice, okay? Excellent. However, how do I make a perfect circle? I got real close, but let's pretend that I wasn't close at all. Super Bowl's coming up in a couple weeks, so we'll make a football. Okay, how do I make a perfect circle? Yeah.
You can write in the radius coordinates.
I like it. I like it. So if you analyze the tool properties over in the radius channel box over here, if we can make these 2 values the same, then it will be a perfect circle, right? So let me just Command-C to copy that value, Command-paste on that other one, and then hit the return key. Mission accomplished. Perfect circle. Yes, ma'am. Aha! I can see exactly what's going on. Pam ran into a problem. Pam was doing exactly what we were doing earlier, and she was deleting her teapot. At some point, and let me just do it real fast, and I don't know, Pam, if you did this on accident or what, okay? I'm going to guess at one point you had everything selected in item mode, and then Pam, hit the delete key. Okay? The delete key, okay, and I want you to look very, oops, hit the wrong button. Come on, fingers, there we go. So there's my mesh item. If I hit the delete key, it deletes that mesh item. You deleted the container that contains all your geometry. That happens, it's no big deal. If you return to the top of your screen, and I have a couple projects going here. Let me just clean this up a little bit. Okay. If you go to the top of your item list where it says Add Item, click on the arrow. Don't click on the word, click on the arrow. Just add a mesh item into your scene. That'll give you an empty container for you to build your stuff in. You had to have a mesh item in order for us to create, component meshes. No problem. All right. All right, so let's go back to making a perfect circle. Yes, you absolutely can go into your channel box over here and just make sure that these two values are the same. Perfect circle. That's a lot of work, though. That's a tremendous amount of work. I don't want to do that, okay? I want to keep my attention and my mouse cursor in the area of interest, where I am modeling. I don't want to have to go back and forth between the left-hand side and the viewport. There's a really great keyboard shortcut that will help us. Oops, my moto's deciding it didn't want to play nicely. There's a really great keyboard shortcut that will help us create perfect circles upon creation. And we have to be disciplined in this, okay? We have to be disciplined. And we're going to practice this together so we can get some good practice in. Because once you master this, believe it or not, 3D modeling becomes a whole lot easier inside of Modo, okay? I want to make a perfect circle upon creation. So here's the sequence that we're going to follow. We're going to turn on the cylinder tool. Just turn it on. We're now going to go into our viewport and then single left click. Just left click once. Don't left click and drag. Just left click, tap. See, look, I'm not even touching my mouse right now. Okay? Once you single left click, you can see that there's some tool handles that will get placed inside of your 3D scene. Move your cursor away from those tool handles. Check it out. My cursor is way up here in the top right-hand corner of my viewport. Still, I have not done a single thing with my hands other than move my cursor. That's all I've done. With my cursor very far away from my tool handles, I'm going to hold down the Control key. Then, left click and drag. And I dragged to the right. And you can see a perfect circle is grown from that point. Let me do it one more time, and we'll show you, and we'll just keep practicing here. Turn on the cylinder tool. Single left click inside the scene. Move your cursor away from the tool handles so they're physically off of them. Then hold down the Control key, left click and drag. If you're getting something that looks like a 3D cylinder, like this, you didn't move your cursor away from the tool handle. Okay? Single left click, move your mouse cursor away from the tool handle, hold down the Control key, then left click and drag. Practice this for a minute. Make 10,000 perfect circles. Get good at this. Create the muscle memory right now here in class. And don't leave until you're able to make a perfect circle every single time. Ready, set, go. I'm going to give you some time. Let's do it. I'll help you guys out. Okay, so let's get back together here real fast and continue exploring some of the other features of these shape creation tools that are important for us going forward. Okay, I want to zero in on the cylinder tool one more time. So check it out. Let's go grab the cylinder tool. And once again, I'll just create a perfect circle. Before I drop the tool, however, let's analyze some of the tool properties that are available to us over here in the left-hand side of our interface. Because there's one in here that we really, really want to look at, okay? And that is the sides. That channel right there determines how many points are going to be created around the circumference of our circle, okay? As one might imagine, the more points that we have, the more perfect a circle the computer is going to draw for us. If we reduce this value to something quite low, like let's just do 8, and while the tool is still live, these properties can be changed, and you'll see them kind of show up in front of us. Okay. The number of sides that a circle has determines its resolution, its quality. The lower the number of the sides, it gets very angular, very faceted. And FYI, here's an old school way of creating a triangle pretty fast. It's just a cylinder with 3 sides, right? This is also another way you can make a square or a diamond pretty quickly. Okay, it's a cylinder with 4 sides. So you keep increasing the number of sides, you can see what's happening to our circle. The more points that we have going around our circle, the higher the quality of that circle is going to be. Now, there absolutely is a point where you're going to have so many points on your circle that it doesn't give you any additional quality, okay? So this is a moving target. In some situations, you want a really low number of sides. In other situations, you want a high number of sides. But just keep in mind that we get to control how perfect a circle this is going to be, okay? Okay. As you were drawing your circle here, were you kind of curious how the orientation of those circles was determined? Sometimes the circle was placed on the floor, on the ground, parallel to our grid. Other times, if you notice real directly, maybe your circle was perpendicular to that. What determines the orientation of a shape when it's created? Let me show you a great way of illustrating this idea. And I think I'm going to use the cone tool, because the cone tool in turn kind of creates an arrow for us. The cone tool works almost identically to the way the cylinder tool works. Okay, I can draw the base of the cone. Then the square in the center will allow me to draw out. There we go. Allow me to draw out the point. But how does it determine which orientation to do it in? Well, and I know this is very, very difficult for you to see on the projector here because it is very faint. You'll see it on your local screen. But do you guys see a light gray grid on your screen? That light gray grid is called the work plane, and it's awesome. I love the work plane. I can't live without the work plane anymore. It's so useful of a modeling tool that it's just invaluable for me. The work plane is an interactive snapping grid.
I also noticed that it shows where the work plane is on the compass.
Bingo, yeah. That's that little square down here, this little gray square down here, a compass. That's the current orientation of the work plane. And all of our tools are going to be paired to the orientation of the work plane. Let me show you what I'm talking about. You can see right now that the work plane has snapped itself to the YZ plane, okay? With the work plane snapped to that orientation, my cones are going to be created with their point going that way. However, if I drop the tool and then orbit down, watch what happens to the work plane when I start changing my perspective of the 3D scene. It changes, it snaps. And I know it's kind of hard to see. Look down here at the compass and you'll see it changing its orientation. You'll see it on your screen. It snaps. It changes its orientation. Now, watch what happens when I run the exact same cone tool. which direction is the point of the cone facing? Up, okay? Our objects are always going to be created on the work plane based off of its current orientation. This is pretty fantastic, okay? Because it allows us to create objects in the orientation that we're probably going to want them to be at, right? So if I change my view again, it's going to snap. There it is. It snapped to the XY plane. And now my cones are going to be grown along that plane, okay? This is one of the reasons why folks in old school 3D modelers jump into Modo, is the work plane. It's an incredibly powerful tool that allows us to create things in an orientation very, very quickly. It's more than meets the eye, though. Okay? It's always on, by the way. You can't turn it off. You can turn the visibility of it off, but you can't ever remove its function. It's part of the core architecture of the Modo framework. And let me show you, and I don't want you to kind of consume how I'm doing this, because we'll talk about it in detail later. But just to kind of showcase the power and the role of the work plane, let me show you something here real fast. Okay? Let's pretend that I'm at Industrial Light and Magic, and I'm working on, I don't know, the next TIE fighter, right? And my boss comes in and says, Pat, I need to have a spike coming out of that polygon right there, and I need to be precisely angled to that polygon. And I go, yes, sir, or ma'am, no problem. And then I go back to my desk, and I go, how in the world am I going to do that? I don't know that angle, right? I have to figure, I don't do math, right? I'm sitting in front of a gigantic thinking machine. I'd love to have it figure it out for me, right? And that's the role of the work plane. The work plane can change its orientation based off of a selection. I've just aligned my work plane to that polygon, and with that alignment in tow, watch what happens when I draw my shape now. It's perfectly aligned to that polygon, okay? In addition, you can also center it pretty quickly in that world as well. Now, it's perfectly aligned to the angle of that polygon and in the dead center of that polygon, okay? The work plane allows us to change this plane to a local understanding of a shape, and it's incredibly powerful, okay? I like it very much. I bring this to your attention because it's important to realize its function and its purpose inside of the entire Modo world. A lot of folks, they don't understand what that light gray grid is, and it's a snapping guide. It's an interactive snapping guide that changes its orientation based on our view of our three-dimensional scene. And it really helps us. It helps us in a big way. It saves us from having to go into a quad view of our 3D scene to get the accuracy that we need. In other applications, they force you to work in an environment that looks like this. I don't like this, right? I've split my viewport into 4 quadrants, each quadrant looking at a slightly different perspective of my scene. From the top, the right, the side, and then we have a perspective one in the upper right-hand corner. I'm getting old, okay? My eyes aren't where they used to be. I would really like to have this thing be full screen, but give me the accuracy and the power of all these quad views, right? Because I get a tremendous amount of accuracy in here, right? I can move things very carefully to one another. It's great. The work plane allows me to do that. Okay? It allows me to stay in a maximized perspective view, but gives me the accuracy of working in the quad view. It's great. Since we're talking about changing our perspective of our scene, let's do this. I want to put that teapot back in my scene here real fast. And I forgot to mention this before, and for that I apologize. We can change our perspective of our three-dimensional scene. Our view of our scene is these buttons in the upper left-hand corner. Right now, we're looking at our scene through a perspective view, which allows us to orbit, pan, and zoom around. However, if we click on this button, we can change it to an orthographic view. Maybe we want to see our three-dimensional scene from the front. Okay, there it is. Here it is from the top. Now, in these orthographic views, we lose the ability to orbit around our models. It's locked. We can only pan and we can only zoom in and out. In every sense, this is kind of like a two-dimensional view of our three-dimensional scene, and at times these are really quite nice to be able to zip in and out of because it allows us to be accurate. Okay? Let's change it back over into perspective. Since we're talking about it, this next button here is going to change how our viewport is drawn. Using the default viewport shading model, we're going to get our scene to look like that, and it looks pretty great. Everything's nice and smooth shade. However, it's not the only shading model that we can use. If you click on this button, we can look at our scene where everything is a wireframe. If you're working in really dense scenes where we have a couple hundred items and millions of polygons, changing it over to wireframe is going to give you some performance because now the computer is just trying to draw the outlines of your shape and not smooth shade the interiors of them. Play around with them. You can't break it. There's solid vertex maps. Those are pretty neat. There's the good old fashion reflection shading model. Makes everything kind of look like a shining reflective. This is actually quite useful inside the 3D modeling process. However, do not, and I got to apologize to the Luxology developers that are currently listening, which I'm sure none of them are, because why would they? Don't change your shading model over to the advanced shading model. If you're working at home and you got a nice high-end rig with a really beefy graphics card, change it over to the advanced shading model. It is awesome. You're going to love it. It's fantastic. It takes advantage of some really great high-end graphics features, right? And it's pretty cool. Our little iMacs, though, don't have the required, they don't even meet the minimum graphics card requirements for that viewport. It's some pretty bleeding-edge technology, and you can do it. I mean, you can click on the button. It's not like your machine's going to melt or anything, right? See how it takes just a very, very long time to update? Because it's actually swapping the viewport with a new one. And it's redrawing your scene with this new technology in tow, and it's very, very neat, okay? On the surface, it doesn't look too different, but you're going to see that, you'll see all your lights and your shadows, and I mean, it's really high-end. I know they've been making some really great inroads with it at the moment. My graphics card on my laptop, even though it's a good graphics card, still is not high-end enough to showcase really all the features of it. And a lot of low-end iMacs like we have in here, it's just going to bog down your machine and make it almost unusable. If you have one of those really great, Titan X cards, right? If you got like a $3,000 graphics card on your machine, then work in the advanced viewport. It's awesome. But for us peons out there that can't afford a $3,000 video card, we'll be working with the default viewport, which is just as good. All right. RayGL is pretty neat. RayGL gives you a preview of what the computer is going to draw in the viewport itself. Okay. With RayGL on, you can see that the shadows are starting to show up on the model itself. You can turn the wireframes off and get a really good understanding of visually how this model is going to look when you go over and hit that big magical render button. I usually leave it off, but it's another nice little feature. It's really kind of helpful, actually, when you're doing complex geometry. All right. For your lab assignment this week, I'm going to ask you guys to make some really great, easy, simple unit primitives. Now, we've been making some really great, simple shapes, but there's something else out there called a unit primitive that I want you guys to focus on, and this is going to be the world's easiest lab assignment. If it takes you more than 10 minutes, then you weren't paying attention in class today, okay? Unit primitives are defined shapes. There are a number of them, some basic unit primitives. We return to our shape creation tools. Of course, these are going to allow us to make custom-driven shapes, a custom square, a sphere that's any size that we want. But a unit primitive is a shape, a rectangle, a cube that's defined. If you think about it, a cube is it's got a height value, a width value, and a depth value, right? Well, a unit primitive, it's a 1 by 1 by 1 cube. It's a defined shape. It's a known entity inside of our world. It's a perfect square. And we can create some unit primitives quite easily, okay? However, it requires a keyboard modifier. If you hold down the control key on your keyboard, notice that we get a whole bunch of rulers that pop up right next to those icons. Those rulers are a nice visualization of making a unit cube. So if you click on, I'm going to zoom out here for a second. If you click on it, whoop, there it is. I've made a perfect cube. All unit primitives are going to be generated at the origin of our scene. Okay? So keep that in mind, at the origin, at the center of the universe. So there's my unit primitive cube. If I return to my shape creation tools and hold down the control key and click on the sphere, what? Bingo. Okay, remember, all of these unit primitives are going to be created at the origin in the exact same place. So, where's my sphere? What's your name again? Jesse, where's my name? Where is it? It's inside the cube, okay? So if we were to select the cube real fast and move it, I'm just going to hit the W key. And there she blows. There it is. Okay, let's do it one more time. I'll make my cylinder. And I'll move it out of the way. Ta-da! Cool, huh? Unit primitives. Basic building block shapes. Yes, ma'am? Do you see the little rulers pop up on the icon? Yeah, okay, let's check it out. All right, let's check it out. Okay, let's do this. Let's make a new mesh item. Yep. Ah, ha ha. I'm going to share this with the class. Because Pam, you just did something unbeknownst to you, no problem at all. But this brings up a very, very important part. Okay. And I had to switch machines, so sorry, live streamers, you don't get to see this. thing go a whole lot easier. Okay, check it out. So if you want to change your unit of measurement inside of Modo, it's really, really, really easy. You know, for whatever reason, good old America, we got to be different, right? We just got to be different. It drives me crazy. I think I saw somewhere that there's 2 countries in the world that use the standard imperial version of measurement, right? It's like us and a tiny country in Africa that use feet and inches. And then everywhere else in the world uses the metric system. It's just bonkers. The metric system is so much better than feet and inches, but it's what we learn. It's good to make Modo reflect how our brains often think. We can change these parameters quite easily by going to the dark Modo pull-down menu at the top of the screen and opening up our global Modo preferences. You'll get a pop-over, and specifically, let's see, it is under, it always takes me a second, it's under Units, and it's down here under Input, the input category of options, Units. And that's at the very top. We want to be English. And now it's all feet in inches. Okay? Yeah.
So let's say, for example, we did that today, and then tomorrow, so if everything gets all reset, then you'll be back in longer.
Well, I don't think the Modo preferences are going to get reset. It's basically the files that you create. Yeah.
Okay.
So it should be the same, but who knows? Unless someone changes it back. Yeah. Yeah, our labs are kind of the wild, wild west because you never know who's going to come in after you and start poking around. This classroom's used by other programs within our school, so who knows? Who knows? Anyways, let's get back to it. There's one final thing that we got to talk about today before we can walk away, and that's how to render. Okay? Now, we're going to have very deep, very lengthy conversations about how to render, right? Up until now, the only thing that we've been doing is been building these wonderful shapes in Modo, but they're only going to live in Modo until we draw them, until we ask the computer to make a picture of them for us. Okay? This process is called rendering. It is an art form unto itself, and we're very lucky to have a fantastic render engine inside of Modo. To access this workflow, we're going to return to the top of the screen where we have all these tabs and click on that gigantic render button. And it's going to change our interface. The first part of the render environment is called the preview window, and this is worth the price of admission, believe it or not. This is a try before you buy kind of environment. It gives us a low-quality preview of what the high-quality render is going to look like. If you hit the gigantic play button, it begins the preview render. It's pretty fantastic, by the way. Bloop. And now we're seeing what the computer is going to draw. We haven't actually drawn anything yet. It's just a preview. It's just a preview. This seems kind of silly, but believe it or not, Modo is one of the few applications that has a preview renderer, okay? A lot of other apps, you have to commit to a full-blown render to see what your picture is going to look like.
How do we get there?
Yeah, so I went to the top of the screen, and I selected this render tab. Yeah. And that will get you in here. If you hit the big black or the big white play button, it'll begin your Modo. Oh, you pressed render? No. Okay, here's what's happened on Frank's machine real fast. Let me show you. Frank has accidentally.
I didn't press anything.
No, you did. Frank has accidentally collapsed his switcher bar. If you click on, see how you can expand and collapse this, Frank? All the tabs. If you click on that dark line again, all those tabs will pop back up.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Where he was going, and this is a common mistake that people fall into, is that he was going to the render pull-down menu, which isn't where we want to go, okay? This is actually going to fire off a full-blown render and draw the image. We want to set up the render, change our perspective, and compose a nice shot before we commit to drawing a picture, okay? All right, is everyone in here? Excellent. So here's what we're going to do. we need to, so the preview window is a preview of what the final render is going to look like, but we're not done yet. We need to recompose our shot and change our camera's angle so we can take a pretty picture of our entire scene. This is our preview window. It's more than just kind of a static environment where we passively kind of get an understanding of what the render is going to look like. It's an active part of our workflow. And this is kind of neat. I'm going to use the same viewport navigation controls that I've been using in the other viewports to tumble and orbit and pan my camera in the preview window. Check it out. Hold down the Option key, and now I'm changing my render camera's perspective of my scene. Option Control to zoom out some. You can do Option Shift to pan it around, and life is good. I can look at my scene, and this is specifically how the computer is going to draw my image. Okay. I mentioned this last time. We're not in the business of 3D, okay? On the surface, it kind of feels like we're in the business of 3D, but we are fundamentally in the business of 2D. At the end of every day, we're going to hit that render button and ask the computer to draw an image for us. It's always, always, always going to draw a picture. That's what it's designed to do. Rendering things in Modo is really kind of neat. I think once we start digging into it in detail, you're going to love it. If you want some additional information about the power of the Modo rendering engine, just go check out my YouTube channel. I have an entire playlist devoted to rendering. You'll see that in action in about 4 weeks. Okay? We're going to have an entire day devoted to rendering. It's all we talk about. This is one day. Because this rabbit hole goes very, very deep. However, for the next couple of weeks, we're going to keep it basic. And it's important that we go through our entire sequence on every single project. So for both your homework and your lab this week, you're going to be rendering a very simple scene. Let's render my simple scene. I've composed a good shot. This looks pretty good. And then we're going to hit this button right here, the F9 key or this render button. Okay? This is going to fire off our Modo render engine. And the computer is going to go in and physically draw the pixels for our picture. There it goes. Goes pretty fast. Goes really fast, actually. With simple geometry, it goes really fast, okay? With more complex geometry, it does not go really fast. Rendering can take a long, long time, especially when you're working with a whole bunch of geometry, a whole bunch of textures, and some fancy render features. It just takes a while, okay? I would love to go talk to John Knoll down at Industrial Light and Magic and see how long the final shot in Rogue One took to render. Because I can only imagine how long that thing took to render. That must have taken days to render. Okay, for a long time, the record for the longest render came from the first Transformers film. This is before Avatar came out, and Avatar, 10-foot blue people, not Airbender Avatar, right? Yeah, it was the shot where the Autobots come to the planet for the first time in the first Transformers film, aka the good Transformers film, right? All of them have been not as good as the first one, and subsequently worse every year, in my opinion. They still have Marky Mark in it, man. Mark Wahlberg, really? I don't like Mark Wahlberg. Anyways, yeah. Anyways, for the longest time, there was a shot in the first Transformers film when all 5 of the Autobots roll down that long brick alleyway, and then when they get down to the end, they meet Shia LaBeouf and what's-her-face, and all 5 of the Autobots transform at the first time, and it's the first time anyone sees a transformation. And the render camera is right up next. It's right up next to the so you got the hero model, the hero textures, the hero animations. The render camera is feet away from these CG models. Everything is incredibly high resolution, right? And it's a long shot too, because it's this big epic pan and tilt where each Autobot gets a moment where they transform right in front of the camera, and then finally the camera rests on Optimus Prime, and we get the moment we've all been waiting to see. We see Optimus Prime turning and transform into his robot character, right? That used to be the record holder shot for the longest render. Used to be. Guess. Per frame. It's a good 10-second shot, right? Maybe even a little bit longer than that. Running at 24 frames a second. So at the very least, they are rendering 240 frames. How long do you think it took to render 1 frame. It's less than 2 weeks. Thankfully, it's less than 2 weeks. Whew. Any other guesses? It's less than 2 weeks. It's more than a minute. For 1 frame. Yeah, longer than a day. Yeah, 2 days. 48 hours to render 1 frame. And they had 240 of these things to go through, right? Rendering can take a long, long time. Yeah.
What do you think they do when they're rendering frames? Just waiting for it to render. It's like, okay.
Oh, they're just hanging out.
Party.
Yeah. No, it's the at places like Industrial Light and Magic, they have gigantic render farms. I've seen the ILM render farm. It's massive. It's about the size of a football field, a room about the size of the football field, and it's just full of computers, like the server computers, like the server cabinets. Okay, and it's full of machines, and all those machines do is just crunch numbers and render.
Is each one of those computers like rendering a different frame?
Or sometimes multiple computers will render 1 frame. Yeah. You got it. Yeah, and believe it or not, there are people out there called render wranglers, where all they do is render frames. That's all they do. They manage the render farm, they render images, they manage the data, and they crunch the numbers. That's their exclusive job.
Any idea what the pay scale is?
I have no idea. Hopefully a lot. It's boring. It is the epitome of grunt work, right? You just sit there watching, kind of grow. Yeah. I can only imagine it's like there's like some dude that's like totally like broken, being the render wrangler. His eyes are all bloodshot. His hair's messed up. Yeah. Anyways, point being, it can take a while to render stuff, right? It's not going to be as fast. It's not always going to be this fast. From time to time, it's going to take some energy. Okay. When we finish rendering inside of Modo, are we actually done? No, because the image is still in Modo. The computer's drawn it, but it hasn't saved it yet, okay? So here's the last little bit. There's a button down over here called Save Image, okay? So you're going to want to save that. Save it to your desktop or wherever you're saving your project files. Save it as a JPEG, okay? So give it a good name, okay? Save it as a JPEG, you're on your way. We're going to save it as a JPEG for the next couple weeks just to keep it easy. The JPEG file format is not great for 3D because it heavily compresses our file, but it's okay for the next couple weeks while we get our sea legs underneath us, okay? And then once you have your image saved, it's a photograph just like any other photograph, just like a picture you take with your phone, okay? Yeah. You would? Okay.
Sorry.
Yep. That one down there.
Oh, this one?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. Now, when it comes to submitting your homework and your lab assignments, there's always going to be 2 things that you're going to submit to me. Your saved rendered image. You're always going to render something and you're always going to submit it. In addition, you're also going to save a project file. And that comes from this save. The File Save option produces what's called your LXO, your Luxology object file. This is your raw master file for this project. Keep them, preserve them at all costs, because it's the only thing that contains your geometry. If you lose your LXO, you've lost everything, okay?
What is it called?
LXO, and I can show you I got a zillion of them on my machine.
It stands for
Luxology object file. Yeah, so if you look, here's the 3D Axis overview project file that I gave you at the beginning of class today. Its file extension is .lxo, okay? LX stands for Luxology. Modo was originally developed by a company called Luxology. And then they got purchased, about 4 years ago now, by a company called The Foundry. So you're going to be giving me your LXO and your render for every single project that we do in here. All right. Let's talk real fast about your homework. Your homework is a fun little project. It's called the shape sorter. It shouldn't take you too long. It's a little puzzle. And the purpose behind this puzzle is for you to get all those little yellow pieces in their corresponding opening in the blue frame. Yeah. You're good. I think you'll be good to go. I'll see you next week. It is a puzzle. I'm not going to tell you how to achieve this puzzle. It's up to you to figure it out. It's a test for your move, rotate, and scale tools to get all of those shapes in their corresponding hole. It shouldn't be too impossible. I think you can figure it out. Yep. When you're yeah, go ahead.
So we just put it in the hole, like it may be, and then
You got it.
picture of it and send you the picture and LSO.
Yep. So when you're finished, render your image. There it goes. It's going to draw it. Boop. Save your render. Name. I've given you the naming conventions for all of your files. Okay. Basically, for everything that you turn into me, you're going to start it with your last name, GCOM 402. Okay. I have a bunch of these files that I now have to manage. If you think about it, there's what, 28 of you in here? Every week, 28 people are going to be giving me 2 files for the lab and 2 files for their homework. Okay. I have a lot of data to manage. So everything gets a last name and a class number, okay? And then if it's a homework, it's just going to be the name of your homework project. So, all right. If it's a lab assignment, you'll put lab in there and then the name of your lab assignment. Like the lab you're going to be doing this week is unit primitives. I ran out of space there. That's not how you spell primitives. There we go. Make sense? Okay. Let's return back to Canvas for a second and take a look at specifically what I would like you to do for your homework this week, and then we'll get out of here. Okay? As I just mentioned on the shape sorter assignment, your mission is to download the project file that I've given you right there. Okay? That's the project file. That's the goal. Okay? To take all those little yellow pieces and put them in their corresponding opening. Okay? When you're finished, save your project file, make a render, submit both of these back here on Canvas. So when you're all done, return to this assignment sheet, and then you're going to hit this button in the upper right-hand corner where it says Submit Assignment. It's a little confusing at first because you think that nothing happens, but it's going to take you to the bottom of the page where the submission area has been opened up for you, and you can attach those 2 files to your submission. Okay? It's pretty easy. Choose File. Find where you saved your LXO, okay, and your render, and then hit Open. And it will attach them to your submission. I won't do it here because I can't actually. If you want to write a comment to me and say, this was the coolest thing I've ever done, Professor Pat is awesome, I will make sure you get an A and, I'm joking. Yeah. But no, you don't have to write a comment. If you run into but you can. You don't have to write a comment, but you can. Okay? But keep in mind, your job's not done until you hit this gigantic Submit Assignment button. Okay? You haven't done anything until you hit that button. Okay? Once that button's been registered, it'll upload it to my portion of the website. I'll be able to grade it and pull it down and take a look at it. Okay? It's pretty straightforward for the most part. That's your homework. Your lab, most of you are probably halfway through your lab if you've been kind of following along. It'll take another 10 minutes to do. It's the unit primitives lab. I would like you to make these 5 unit primitives and then render it. And then make a render. That's it. Those 5. Cube, sphere, cylinder, cone, and a donut. Okay? Don't worry about textures. Just make them gray. We haven't even talked about textures yet. Just make those 5 unit primitives, make a render, upload it. It's just kind of a test of the system, just to make sure that we can submit things. And if there's a bug in the system, now is a good time to resolve that bug before we go too much further. Sound good? Yes, ma'am. Yeah, the unit primitive ones. So hold down your control key and then clicky click. Questions and comments on what we're going to be doing this week? Yeah. Remember to hold down that control key before you click on the button. You got it. Questions, comments, concerns? Everyone feeling it? All right, good luck. We'll see you guys next week.